Predicting the Premier League relegation battle today, we're going to look at the bottom of the league and we're going to be targeting those 3 relegation places and predicting who is going to be playing Championship football next season. Get into the comments right now before we even start the video and let me know who you think is going down in the Premier League. This is the Premier League review part 2. Of course, if you've not checked out part 1, we're looking at Manchester United and what they need to do to get back into form to win the FA Cup final against Manchester City. But we're not talking about top of the league right now. We're talking about the drop zone. For me, I think there's 5 teams that are fighting out for relegation this season. I think Bournemouth and Wolverhampton Wanderers are out of the relegation battle. I think Bournemouth's form is so hot and cold. They're good one week, they're bad the next week. They will be absolutely fine. I think Lopetegui and the job that he's done at Wolverhampton Wanderers also takes them out of the race. So today we're going to be focusing on Leeds United, Leicester City, Everton, Nottingham Forest and of course Southampton. Looking at the numbers, let's dive into that first. 17th place in the Premier League of course keeps you up. Over the last 5 seasons the average has been 36.8 points. So hitting around 37 points over the last 5 seasons has seen you stay in the Premier League. I think for this season as well, because of the dominance of the kind of top 4 teams in the Premier League, I think that could be slightly lower, so you're not going to be having to go that far. 37 points obviously will keep you up, but maybe around 35 could just keep you in the Premier League. But fans of the likes of Southampton, Forest, Everton, Leicester City and Leeds United, you don't want that. You want to be comfortable, you want to be sorted. So let's take that last relegation spot as an example for maybe looking at this season. Everton have won 0.88 points per game in the league this season. If we extrapolate that over the last 6 games of the season, Everton would finish on around 33 points. So the bar is dropping a little bit. But taking Sean Dyche's record as Everton manager, they're on 1.08 points per game. So that'd be a little bit more increased to around 34 points or 34.48 points if we're being specific. So 35 should keep you up in the Premier League this season. But let's stop the numbers, let's stop the rubbish and let's dive into the teams and have a look at the run-in and what they're doing at the moment and their form and key players. In terms of teams that usually get relegated in the Premier League, it kind of coincides with the worst goal difference in the competition. At the moment, that's Nottingham Forest with a minus 33. In terms of the run-in, we've run the numbers. Leicester City have got the easiest run-in with the average position in the Premier League of 11th of their opponents they're going to face. And Leeds United have got the hardest run-in with the average position of their opponents around 9th in the Premier League. But let's start with Leeds. They're an interesting team at the moment. They've been pretty sloppy in recent weeks. They've conceded a lot of goals. 5 against Crystal Palace, 6 against Liverpool, and of course losing 2-1 to Fulham in the last Premier League game. They are not in a good run of form. And the fact that we mentioned before, the average position of their opponents they've got to face 9th in the Premier League, facing the likes of Manchester City, Newcastle and Spurs, it's going to be pretty tough for Leeds to get out of this mess. You'd look at those games, you know, the City, Newcastle and Spurs, that's probably 0 points on paper, with those teams fighting for the Premier League title and the Champions League. But also looking at match day 37 against West Ham United. West Ham have just got a little bit of run of form. You're looking at the likes of Antonio, Jarrod Bowen, hitting a little bit of form at the end of the season. That could also be a really tricky fixture. So in a way, they don't want to leave it to the last 2 games of the season. They're facing opponents that could have something to play for, or West Ham United getting themselves up for a potential Conference League final. The next 2 games, I think, are absolute pivotal for Leeds United. They're playing Leicester City, and they're also facing Bournemouth, 2 teams that are in and around that area in the Premier League. If they fail to win these games, I think Leeds United are relegated. But if they do win those 2, they'll be on 35 points and they'll be close to staying up in the Premier League. I think the key players for Leeds United going into these games, I think we've got to see Patrick Bamford being paired with Rodrigo up front. Rodrigo is Leeds United's top scorer in the Premier League this season with 11 goals, but only 2 have come since the World Cup. And I think getting both Bamford and Rodrigo in the starting 11, like we saw at the start of the season when Leeds United were flying, I think that's got where Leeds United need to go. I think Rodrigo's really good off a striker. I think he's arguably better than playing as a false 9, having a focal point ahead of him and allowing him to attack the box. That's absolutely vitally important going forward. I think one of the other things that Leeds United need to do to stay up in the Premier League is getting Gnonto into the starting 11. Gnonto has been an absolute breath of fresh air in the Premier League. The way he attacks, he dribbles, he's such a creative forward. can make something out of nothing. I think Leeds United need that. But you're taking, he's only played 54 minutes in the last 5 Premier League games for Leeds United out of a potential 450 minutes. That's not good enough. That's something that Javi Gracia really needs to change. Get Bamford in, get Rodrigo in together as a front two, with Nonto as that left winger is vitally important for Javi Gracia. 67% of Leeds United's points have come at home this season, with 20 points from 16 games. Ellen Road's going to be vitally important if Leeds United want to stay in the Premier League. Moving on to the next club in the table, that's Leicester City, who currently sit in 17th. On paper, they've got the best squad by a country mile out of those bottom 5 sides. Right, let's move on to Leicester City, who on paper have the best squad of these 5 bottom teams by a country mile. If James Maddison and Harvey Barnes get firing in the back of the end of the season, they should be absolutely fine. Harvey Barnes, 10 goals in the Premier League, Maddison 9. They're 2 massive players for Leicester City, and both have had spells with injury this season. So I think those 2 guys coming back into the starting 11 are going to be vitally important. Combining that with maybe an Iheanacho up front, I think Leicester City should be absolutely fine. The average position in the Premier League of their opponents to come, as we mentioned previously, is 11th. They've got the easiest run, and with Dean Smith setting them up in a kind of 4-4-2 shape, they should be absolutely fine to stay in the Premier League. I think one of the other big things that Dean Smith has done as well is reintroduce Soyuncu into the back line. Soyuncu's had a bad season under Brendan Rodgers, but was man of the match against Wolverhampton Wanderers in the previous Premier League game. We know that he's a fantastic defender. 7 clearances, 2 blocks, an interception, won 100% of his 2 tackles against Wolves. If they can get him back into the starting 11, Leicester City will look so much better defensively. You're combining that with the flair of Tete, Maddison, Barnes and Iheanacho up front. For me, Leicester City will be absolutely fine. Will be in the Premier League next season. They've got some tough games, of course, against Liverpool, against Newcastle United, against West Ham, but I think the squad is good enough to be very competitive in those matches. So let's move to the bottom 3 teams that are going to really struggle to stay in the Premier League. First up, Sean Dyche's Everton. They have massively struggled for goals in the Premier League this season. 24 goals in 32 Premier League games, the worst record by any side. They've also got a pretty difficult run in the league, facing the likes of Brighton, Manchester City. They've got a tricky game at home to Newcastle as well coming up. They've got to face Leicester. There's some really, really big games there. In terms of what we've seen with Sean Dyche, the organisation when he came in was really, really good. Fantastic result against Arsenal, playing very much a 4-5-1, covering the flanks. The issue have been, the focal point of the attack has been a problem. Without Calvert-Lewin, Everton look woeful going forward. And I think one of the big things you've got to remember with Calvert-Lewin, he's got the potential to absolutely explode in the Premier League. It's just been the fitness has been a concern over the last 2 seasons. We go back to the 2020-21 season, he scored 16 Premier League goals in 33 games. If Sean Dyche can get a tune out of Calvert-Lewin, they will stay up in the league. I think there's got to be some points that have got to get picked up very, very soon. Leicester have got to beat the teams in and around them. We're talking against the likes of Leicester City. You're looking at the game against Wolves, against Bournemouth. They've got to be wins. Otherwise, Everton will be relegated and we're playing Championship football under Sean Dyche. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think Everton might need a season in the Championship under Sean Dyche to bounce back. Sean Dyche is very, very good at that level. The way that he builds a 4-4-2 with 2 centre forwards, Everton would score a lot of goals in that division. And I think, cutting the squad and building for the future, Ellis Sims and Calvert-Lewin would score an absolute hatful of goals in the division. Could get rid of a lot of the players that have been getting paid far too much money for the performances from this season. The likes of Tarkowski, Connor Cody, you could see those 2 guys staying. I generally think, a season in the Championship could be good for Everton. Moving on to Nottingham Forest, as we mentioned, the worst goal difference in the Premier League. Their run-in is reasonably tough. When I say reasonably tough, it's very, very tough. The likes of Brighton, they've got to face Brentford, Chelsea and Arsenal. They're all really difficult games. And when you look at that on paper, it's difficult, but facing Brighton just after they've lost the FA Cup semi-final against Manchester United just 3 days later could be a good position for them. Looking at Brentford, one of the most out-of-form teams in the Premier League, just 1 win in their last 7. Southampton, last in the Premier League. We'll move on to those very, very shortly. Pochettino could return as Chelsea manager, which could be a real difficult position for Forest. One of the big problems for Forest this season has been their away form. They've got 6 points on the road this season, the worst record of any team in the division, and they've got to face Brentford, Chelsea and Crystal Palace. That's going to be a struggle. And looking at their current form at the moment, without a win in around 11 games in the Premier League, it's simply not enough to keep them up. I think looking at the attacking side of their game, they need to be freeing the forwards a lot more. The likes of Brennan Johnson, Owoni and Morgan Gibbs-White. For me, that's got to be the front three going into the back end of the season. They've got to be supplying them with more of the ball. They've got to dominate more of the games. And they've got to try and really take control. Otherwise, it'll be Championship football for Forest next season. And finally, Southampton. I think Southampton are already relegated. Overall this season, they've not been good enough. They need to pick up 13 out of the remaining 18 points to finish on 37 points in the Premier League this season, and they've just not shown enough in recent weeks. The 3-3 draw with Arsenal was a really good result, but they really had to win that game if they wanted to stay up. I think one player that Premier League teams really need to look at in the summer if Southampton get relegated is Carlos Alcaraz. He is a player of great quality, a goal and assist against Southampton, only 20 years old, an absolute star for the future. So I think for Southampton it is absolutely done. Other players that teams need to kind of have a look at in defence, I think looking at the likes of Livramento, Bella Kotchap, and of course Salisu could do a really good job at Premier League level. But for me, Southampton are down. So let's finish off with the prediction. I'm predicting the following teams to be playing Championship football next season. I'm going to go Leeds United, Nottingham Forest and Southampton. Get into the comments below who you think will be relegated. It's a tough call, but those are the teams I think are going to go down. Of course, subscribe if you're new. Check out SofaScore, and we'll be back very, very soon on the Statman Dave Clips channel. See you later.